without rattling off the section dates, the anti-fraud provisions have existed under federal securities law since the 1930s. So these have been around for a long time. And every official statement that the city has ever produced has been subject to these anti-fraud provisions. What those provisions generally require is that the city, or the officials here, are prohibited from making any untrue statement of a material fact, and you're also required to not omit to state material information if it's viewed as relevant to the marketplace. What is material varies depending on all the facts and circumstances. So, for example, for some cities, there could be $1 million shortfall in revenue. There could be $1 million unexpected expense, which would not be, quite frankly, much more than a little teeny blip on their radar because their budget is so big that it really doesn't have an impact on them. For other cities, a $10,000 shortfall in revenue or $10,000 obligation that wasn't scheduled for could be material depending on the circumstances under which it happened and depending on the overall budget of the city. So materiality is something that is very specific to all of the facts and figures and information that exist around that. So again, you don't have to tell the marketplace every single detail about who you are. In fact, that can be viewed as misleading if you flood them with information that really doesn't have much to do with their investment decision. But you do need to, and you have an obligation to try to sort out what's really important and what really isn't important to an investment decision. Similarly, you have an obligation to make sure that when you provide information to the marketplace that it's factually accurate. But being factually accurate by itself isn't enough. It also can't be in any way misleading, and just providing information truthfully may not be sufficient if you have omitted to include information that might be viewed as material to an investor. So you really kind of have to think about what is it that's going on in our city that might be relevant. And when I talk with cities, or when I'm dealing with specific instances with governing body members or staff members about how to make this judgment, I really try to ask them to sit in the shoes of the bond owner. And as we go through this discussion, I want you to think about, if I'm investing my life savings in municipal bonds, and I'm having to make a choice as to which municipal bond do I buy or do I keep a municipal bond, what's the kind of information I would really view as relevant to my investment decision? Because in many ways, with your experience on the governing body, you have an insight to that very few people actually have. So think about it not just in terms of what do I want to talk about as a governing body member, but also, gosh, what would I want to know if I were actually purchasing these obligations? As I mentioned earlier, these anti-fraud provisions, they're going to apply to any type of disclosure that you provide to the marketplace. So that can be official statements, it can be post-issuance reports that you're required to file, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, on the internet. And sometimes it can be in circumstances where what you have done is viewed as taking some action in which you're actually speaking to the marketplace, as the term has been described. Responsibility for compliance. I think it's fairly common for cities to You know, you hire people that do this for a living. This is all we do. This is all I've ever done in my life, is work on bond issues. And you think, well, you know, I can just rely on those folks to make sure that the job is getting done. And we do want you to have confidence in us and to know that we're going to try to advise you of anything that we're aware of that you need to disclose, or circumstances where you need to provide additional disclosure. But in fairness to you, you need to know that the SEC says that's fine, and we absolutely want you to hire and use professionals that know what they're doing. But ultimately, it's your responsibility. Ultimately, it's not my responsibility. Ultimately, it is the responsibility of the elected officials up here to make sure that the disclosure meets the federal securities requirements. I provided you with specifically a quote, again, from the Office of the Securities Administration. This quote was from 2000. I've seen this quote in one way or another repeated, I don't know how many times, from other officials with the SEC, where they're making it clear that the responsibility and the liability for disclosure falls on the issuer, even though you may be relying on professionals to assist you in that process. In addition to the requirements that you have anytime you sell bonds, which is what Laura mentioned, what we're coming up with now. The city's going to be in the process of preparing an official statement to be used to sell the bond issue that's coming up. But in addition to that, since 1990, you have also had a requirement to provide ongoing, continuing disclosure. Because, you know, when you sell bonds, you don't sell bonds to somebody and then they just necessarily hold them until the bonds mature. People buy investments and they're traded every day of the week. Lots of times, right after your bonds are purchased, they're traded, you know, within hours of being purchased. And they could be traded multiple times over the term of a bond issue. And so because of that, the SEC, through enforcement really against the folks that buy your bonds, they require you to enter into a contractual obligation to provide continuing disclosure. And that continuing disclosure involves a couple of things. One, annually, the city is required to post on a central disclosure internet site that the municipal market knows all about, to post on that site your audited financials, and also if the operating and financial data that was included in your official statement, if it's not part of your audited financials, you also have to post that separately. So annually you have to give the marketplace an update of what's financially going on with your city and also about the operations of your city. In addition to that, these continuing disclosure requirements identify 13 separate things that you are obligated to disclose, most of them within 10 days, all of them within a timely manner after you've been aware of an event happening. And these things are going to be things like if your rating changes, your bond rating, which you get, goes up or down, either way, then you're required to disclose that to the marketplace right away. If for some reason you have defaulted on a bond issue, you're required to disclose that right away. If you decide to call your bonds earlier than their scheduled payment date, you have to disclose that right away. And there are a number, like I said, there are 13 other items. The ones I've mentioned are the ones that are most common to events to happen for cities. And in this day and age, before investors bid on your bonds, they're going to be going onto this internet access point. They're going to be checking to see if you've been filing your annual statements with them. They're going to check to see if it looks like there's been any of these events posted, because it helps inform them as to whether or not you're the type of issuer that's keeping up with your ongoing requirements. we're talking about just a